Hello, everybody. Welcome to What Would Your Ideal World Be? A new podcast which examines many important people and the important things in their lives, what they think about most current trends at the moment, what they think about certain subject matters, and of course, what their ideal world would be. Today's guest will be Anne-Marie Waters, who is the founder and current leader of the anti-Islam populist right political party for Britain, otherwise known as the For Britain movement. She's also been a prominent member of both UKIP and the Labour Party, and has stood for election for all three organisations, most recently under the For Britain movement moniker in the Batley and Spen by-election. Waters was a previous guest on this show back in 2017. If you want to listen to that podcast, which also featured YouTuber Jon Lotz, better known by his YouTuber name, General Lotz, the link is in the description below.
Hello.
Hello, you there?
Oh, hello. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Not too bad.
Okay. The first question I wanted to ask you, if that was all right, is
Yeah, go for it.
you recently stood in the Batley and Spen by-election. Why did you stand in this particular area? What was campaigning there like, and how did you feel about the results? If you don't mind me asking.
No, that's fine. Well, why we stood was because of an issue that we knew, or that I knew, would be put to the candidates, which was the issue of the teacher who'd showed a picture of Muhammad in class and had been basically hounded out of his job and his life threatened and police protection and all the rest of it. And so I knew that if in a controversial seat like that, that this issue would come up. And it was a chance really to show that what the responses would be, both of other small parties and of the big parties, which is they would avoid the issue. And they did avoid the issue. And you have a free speech is important, but a response from the big parties and indeed from the smaller parties. And that was a chance for us to point out other issues surrounding surrounding Islam, surrounding the issues that it raises. It isn't limited to this one person, this one teacher in Batley. There are huge problems here, and there are huge problems that others will not address. And it was a chance for us to address them. Now, the result, of course, is very disappointing, but it was disappointing for all the small parties. But what I would say is that we don't get any media coverage. Royal Mail didn't deliver our leaflet. And so it's expected that we would get these bad results, and that the press has a huge part to play in all of this. I said it doesn't give us coverage, it doesn't give us a platform, which it doesn't. But it also presents to the voting public the status quo, that the choices are Labour or Tory. That's all they really talk about is Labour and Tory, and they don't give a chance to other small parties to speak to the voting public. And I expected this to happen, and it did happen. And we wanted basically to be a part of it, to point this stuff out and to show people that parties in mainstream politics and new upcoming parties like Lawrence Fox's party, for example, are not going to discuss this issue. With any honesty, at least, and that was a chance really to do that.
Mm-hmm. What was campaigning in that area like? What was your response on the doorstep and so on when you did that sort of thing? What was it like?
Well, we got a lot of people who if people come up to you in the street who well, first of all, our security, we hired security for this, and the fact that we have to hire security is very telling anyway. But security wouldn't allow us to do a great deal of on the ground for campaigning. For example, Lawrence Fox held a free speech rally apparently in the centre of Batley, which I wanted to go to. I wanted to go to, and I wanted to express that we had asked to be given a chance to speak at this, and we were ignored. So I wanted to go to it, but my security people wouldn't let me. And there's no point in hiring them if you don't do what they say. But I'll give you one example. I did an interview with Channel 4 on Batley Town Square on the Saturday morning, that Hope Not Hate and you Antifa and all this usual lot. We're planning a rally, and I can't be there. And one of the things that's striking about all of this is I'm presented as some sort of threat. The only threat is towards me. I'm the one that's threatened. I'm the one that's not safe. But one person I really remember, a lady who came up to me in the street when we were down there campaigning on that Saturday morning, and she was tearful. And her granddaughter had been gang raped by one of these grooming gangs at the age of 12. And I spoke to other parents actually as well, who someone introduced me to. He's an activist there. And there's a lot of this. There's a lot of crimes being committed against white people, for example, that police do nothing about, that aren't reported in the press. And we have, you could just look at what's happening now with the football and all this absolute outcry. It's been on the television and all over the press ever since. Now, I unequivocally condemn the racial abuse of these footballers, but what I'm asking for is some consistency. If we're going to condemn racial abuse of footballers, we should be condemning the violent abuse of white people in towns like Batley. And we're not, we never ever do. And I spoke to several people, actually. I was introduced to many of them on the ground who have suffered this. And we're talking about serious crimes being committed against them. We're talking about the rape of young girls. I was told of one family, I met one family whose daughter had killed herself at the age of 12 because she was being repeatedly raped. I mean, none of this is talked about. And these girls are described as white whores and white slags and white. And it's never reported. It's never talked about. We have outrage over Twitter abuse and never any outrage over this. All I'm asking for in this is consistency. So you hear heartbreaking stories. I'd arranged, for example, to speak to one constituent about he had been beaten up in front of his children and called a white bastard. And he wouldn't do the interview because he was too afraid to be exposed on this. I mean, these stories are regular, and it's not just in Batley and Spen either. And that's the kind of stories I heard from people on the ground there. And I expect them. This is what you hear. This is what you hear in areas like this all over the country. It's heartbreaking.
Yes, yeah, it's clearly. And one of the other things I wanted to ask you is that in that era, you were the most, if you don't mind me saying, the most successful candidate who stood on this platform about criticizing Islam in general in that area in Batley and Spen, beating the likes of people like, say, Jada Franson, formerly of Britain First. How did that make you feel to be, the most successful on the ticket when it came to that sort of thing? And do you think that is a good sign, that it bodes well for both you, your party, and your brand of politics? Do you think that's a good sign?
Absolutely. Look, one of the things that we want to do, one of the things I'm worried about, and I to be compared to Jada Franson, I have to say, really, Jada Franson loathes me.
Sorry to bring it up.
No, don't. It's a perfectly fair question, but she does. And not long after that election, she made an attack on me. I've been attacked by the real far right relentlessly. I'm worried about Jada Franson. I'm worried about that element of the far right. And one of the things I want to do is provide a buffer that is not far right. People are going to go to the far right, to dangerous, nasty far right, if we don't allow them to speak about things like this in a reasonable way and to tell the truth about these things. Now, Jada Franson launched an attack on me. I'm gay, I'm Irish. She doesn't like either of those two things. I'm relentlessly attacked on the far right for being gay, for example. So I'm not in that. I'm not the same as those people. I'm really not. They hate me, and that's genuinely true. And hate is the right word. But as far as being, as speaking about these issues and being frank and open and honest about them, yeah, I mean, I'm glad about that, because that's another thing we really want to do is say, look, if you don't listen to us, you will send people over to the actual far right. And you know, this is another danger of this. And I'm just as worried about them as I am. To me, it's two sides of the same coin. I mean, they're both homophobic, they're both misogynistic, they're both, anti-Semitic, hateful. Actually, in that context, is the truth. I don't hate. I just want people to be able to speak honestly and openly about what they see in front of them. And if we don't do it, if we don't allow moderate people to discuss this, they will go to the far right. And one of the things I want to prevent is just that. I'm just as worried about that. So yeah, I mean, we did better than the Social Democrats, and as far as the small parties were concerned, we did better than the others. So yeah, it does, and I know that we do that without being given any platform. You know, Jada Franson got a bigger platform. The press will talk more about Jada Franson because they can dismiss her as far right. With us, if they spoke about us honestly, they know they couldn't actually dismiss us as far right. So that's why we don't get the attention that she gets. But even with all of that, even with pretending we don't exist by the press, Royal Mail not delivering our leaflet, and we know that they did deliver Jada Franson's leaflet. With all of that, we still did better, and it does. It's not great. It's difficult. It's very difficult to break through in a first past the post system, for example. Not impossible, but difficult. So yeah, I am encouraged by that. But we've still got a long way to go and a lot of hard work ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. And what are your current plans for the party as it stands after standing this by-election? Like, where are you planning on contesting? Perhaps if like another by-election shows that we might contest that, or local elections. Like, what's the future for the party as it currently stands?
Well, what we want to do now is we raised a lot of funds for the Batley and Spen by-election, a lot more than we spent. So what we're going to do with that money, we've hired a PR team, essentially, to refine our brand a little bit, to learn about branding, to up our technology output. Everything is going to be reviewed and changed. The image of the party needs to be looked at. So that's what we're going to do at the moment is sort of tightening up the brand. We're changing our regular output. We're professionalizing it a lot more and trying to reach more people that way. As for standing in more by-elections, I'm not sure. I think the Batley and Spen was just almost too good an opportunity for us to turn down. And that opportunity was to show, as what I've just described as in answering your first question. I guess it would depend. Our policy, for want of a better word, is not to stand in parliamentary elections just yet. But Batley and Spen, I guess we just had to. But we will focus on local elections, and I particularly want to get elected locally next year. Luckily, we have elections in Hartlepool, where I am, every year. So that's one of my focuses. But for the moment, and I'm a one step at a time, I'm a big believer in one step at a time. So for the moment, we want to work with this new PR company on tightening up the image of the party, tightening up the branding, tightening up our output, for example, video production and various different things. I think everything can be improved in that regard. So that's what we're working on at the moment. As for elections, my next focus will be on local elections.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of like you were talking about this earlier about media sort of bias and so on, how do you feel like the media, whenever you stand an election or you do this, either ignore you or they sort of smear you? Because I remember a couple of years ago when the Times said you were essentially the new BNP or whatever, or the new statesman compared you to Oswald Mosley. Why do you think they resort to this sort of stuff? Is it because you think they're, they don't want to dare touch the subjects that you talk about, or do you think that a lot of these people aren't particularly, I hate to be very blunt about this, not particularly bright, so they'll just use any sort of label which is to anyone who's to the right of Ken Clarke, pretty much?
I such a brilliant description. It really is. Yeah, I'm glad you said it, because I would have said it if you hadn't. There's a mixture of things. One of them is, and I would, without being unkind, they are not very bright. That is the truth. I mean, I've had many experiences of sitting down and talking to journalists, and you talk about Sharia law, and you talk about the difference between Islam and Muslims, and they stare at you blankly as if they have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And they sort of hit back with, well, isn't that racist? You stop it. This is childish. Can we not discuss these things like adults? Some of it that just aren't very bright, but I do think that there's if you go to the sort of higher levels, national politics, the higher levels of journalism, there is a commitment to the status quo. And I do know from years of experience that in Westminster, the politicians, the senior politicians and the elite level of journalism, they know each other. They drink in the same bars together. They like the status quo. And they like it that Labour and Tory have no problem sharing power between them. I mean, obviously they want to win, with either side, both sides want to win, but they've no problem as long as they maintain between them dominance of the House of Commons. They want it to stay that way. there's an element of maintaining the status quo, this sort of partnership between the press and the senior politicians. But also there's an element of snobbery involved in this as well. There really is. I mean, a lot of us are, not all by any means. Many of our senior activists are not white. We are not a white party, though we're always presented as that. But many of us are white, and many of us are from working class backgrounds, myself included. And they assume this of you. Because you're white and working class, you must be motivated by hate. They can't countenance the idea that I would actually have thought about this stuff, that I would actually have researched and read and understand these issues. I must be a knuckle dragger motivated by hate because I'm white and working class. And that's their snobbery coming through. The irony of it all is that the hatred is coming in our direction. I was asked, and just to go back to that interview I did with the Channel 4 team on the morning in Batley, a guy, Satnam Sangera, and he told me himself he was a Sikh. And at the end of the interview, he asked me, "Why do you hate me?" And I actually laughed. I said, "Do you know what's ironic here?" I said, "It's you that hates me. You have made up your mind that I am just a knuckle dragger, mindless, spitting hate. You have no idea who I am. You have no idea what my background is. You have no idea. You think I'm an uneducated. I'm not. I have 2 degrees. An uneducated, full of hate, ignoramus. That's what you think I am. It is you who hates me. And that's the irony of it all. And there's a lot of that. But ultimately, journalism itself, the quality, the standards of journalism have collapsed in the last couple of decades. They go to Wikipedia now. Instead of coming to me to ask for my comments on something, they go to Wikipedia. They go to Hope Not Hate. I've had articles written about me with the headline, "Who is Anne-Marie Waters?" And never has anyone spoken to me before publishing it. That's insane. That's not journalism. The standard of journalism has absolutely collapsed.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about sort of like this rise of sort of like alternative media online, which is perhaps, often sometimes a little bit more honest and will actually do the work and so on, and sort of like the mainstream responses to that are just sort of like shut it down and so on. And admittedly, for example, this is not an alternative source, mind you, but someone like Tucker Carlson in the States, for instance, who the media honestly try and shut down because they say, "Oh, he's like these fringe commentators," or so on. Do you think they're just so scared of like the apple cart being kicked over that they'll just do anything to sort of silence any alternative voices?
Yeah, it is certainly the fear. There is fear involved in this. They don't want to talk to people like myself because they don't want to publish what we have to say. There is fear involved in it. But I think, we're dealing with, and I don't mean to reduce it or be flippant about it, but largely we're dealing with left-wing thinking, and I'm veering off towards the left. And left wing generally, I think genuinely, many people on the left genuinely don't understand how people are allowed to publicly disagree with them. It is that totalitarian mindset, that controlling mindset, that I don't like what you have to say, you shouldn't be allowed to say it. There's no concept of open and honest debate. It is what you say is hate, therefore you should be banned. And I saw several people on social media, for example, saying that neither I nor Jada Franson should be allowed to stand in a parliamentary by-election. They genuinely don't get it, how it is that we are allowed to speak at all. And that there is that totalitarian, arrogant mindset and that fear of open debate. They don't want open debate, quite frankly, because they know they won't win an open debate. They know that many people will listen to us, many people will agree with us. They have decided that we are the devil incarnate, and therefore we cannot allow it for people to agree with us. So they think they have every right to silence us. And you're right, even people like Tucker Carlson, who has a huge following, huge viewing, they want rid of him. You saw what happened with GB News. It had barely launched when they were attacking big companies for advertising with it. And what's the big problem there is that the big companies kowtow to this. They stop advertising with various publications because the left, this Antifa element, I mean, they will bully They will relentlessly bully. And if they don't get their own way, they'll go on all sorts of social media. They'll start calling companies racist and fascist and Nazi sympathizers and all the usual smears. And the companies just don't want the hassle. So they kowtow immediately. And it's making everything much, much worse. It is giving so much power to these censor types who genuinely believe they have the right to decide what is and isn't heard and discussed in public. That totalitarian mindset, that bullying mindset. And as individuals, I think they are terrified of having their worldview shaken by another opinion being expressed or by another opinion being heard. They commit to these beliefs of theirs and they don't want that worldview shaken. So rather than have it shaken, they just shut down debate, and they do it with anger and with, ironically, hate.
Mm-hmm. And funnily enough, that leads on to the next question. What do you think of GB News then, which is launched a little while ago, and there's been a lot of opinions about it online? What do you think of it? Because it was touted as sort of like the new alternative TV network in Britain or whatever. So what do you think of it?
Well, I mean, I suspect it's going to be what I refer to as so far and no further. They will be anti-woke in a way that's sort of acceptable, if you like, but they won't go too far. They won't have me on, for example. And I would love to. I mean, they wrote to me about asking me for a statement about the. This is after Kim Ledbetter had been sort of confronted by this this guy in the street, and she's been harassed, and Labour were complaining that they'd been assaulted while out campaigning and what have you. And they wrote to me for a statement, and they just never used it. It's give people. I didn't see, in the Batley and Spen by-election, I didn't see them giving the small parties a platform either. So I hope that they get braver. I hope that they find a little bit more backbone as time goes on. But I fear that it will be the opposite. And actually, as time goes on, they'll probably go a little bit more mainstream and a little bit more correct. So I'm not overly impressed so far, I'll be honest.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's why maybe like some of the disappointment maybe from it so far has seen, because if I'm not mistaken, some of the ratings have not been particularly good for over the last few weeks. Do you think there's some, beyond like the technical issues, which have been well pointed out and so on, that some of the disappointment from it not being, I'm not sure you say it like as daring as they would like, has seen sort of like the ratings not be as high in last few weeks as expected, especially with, Andrew Neil taking a quick break, I think he said he was going to do, or something like that.
Right, okay. Well, I wasn't aware that the ratings weren't good, but I think, there are technical issues, and those things will get better as time goes on, I suspect. People always need to find their feet. But if they're having viewing problems, I suspect part of the problem is that people expected them to be a little bit more edgy than they are actually being. And, if we want mainstream media, we can go to the mainstream media. And people may well be disappointed that it's going to be. It isn't as brave as they thought it was going to be. So my suggestion to them would be braver. There is a huge audience out there for genuinely brave journalism. And if they want to get their viewing figures up, I suggest they become a little bit braver, because they're just not being so far. And I think I'm not the only one disappointed then if the viewing figures are falling away.
Mm-hmm. And if in future, like say it actually does become sort of like this juggernaut, like in future, and like the ratings get huge again and so on, and actually decides to become a little bit more daring, do you think that will signal a trend for, like, say, some of the other networks to follow, perhaps, and hopefully then we could get back to a bit more rigor in mainstream journalism because of it?
Yeah, I do, and that's the hope. To my mind, courage is contagious. If it takes one to stand up and say, one with a platform to stand up and say, look, let's be honest about these things. Let's have an open debate. Why are we censoring? Why are we silencing? Let's have an open discussion about these things. Let's hear people's voices. And if GB News did it, then yes, I do think others would follow, because, but they would have to stand their ground. They would have to stand their ground. If they did it, they would become more popular. I have no doubt about that. But they will also come under attack from the left wing, from the Antifa types. And they've got to withstand that. They've got to take those attacks and just keep going, because these people are bullies and they intimidate, they bully. Just ignore them. Keep going, and keep going. If they do that, they will inspire others to do the same, and they can move the Overton window a little bit towards freedom of speech, towards robust and open debate. If people are so appalled by my views, then surely they've got no worries about bringing me on somewhere and dismantling my input. If I'm so wrong, bring me on then and show everyone how wrong I am. They won't, because I'm not. And there may be people will disagree. Some of what I say is facts. Some of what I say is my opinion. But let me speak. Just let me. If I'm so outrageously wrong, then you should have no problem proving that. And then the whole debate would be settled, wouldn't it? But I'm not outrageously wrong. So let's have this debate. If one of them was brave enough to have it, I do think it would inspire others to follow suit. And I do think it would move the Overton window back to, as you say, robust journalism and open debate.
Mm-hmm. And how bad a sign is it currently for a lot of the British broadcasting media that the people who seem to be most against, woke and stuff like that, apparently, are people themselves of the liberal elite? So, for example, people like Piers Morgan, who is supposedly, anti-woke, all this and that, and then he supports like Black Lives Matter, for example, and he's one of the most relentless, like, pro-lockdown people online. How bad is it? How bad is sort of like the liberal sort of echo chamber in sort of broadcasting media when people like him are sort of the best we have currently before GB News and stuff like that to be sort of like supposedly our voices anyway?
Yeah, it's pretty bad, isn't it? I mean, I like some of what Piers Morgan has to say. I mean, he's been brave on the trans issue, for example, he's been brave on the trans issue. Actually, now that I think of it, it's probably the only one I can come up with. But yeah, you're right. It is a bad sign when he's considered particularly edgy. I mean, he was really, really critical of Meghan Markle as well, perhaps a little bit unfairly to my mind. But yeah, you're right. I mean, when he's considered the edgy one, and yet he is enthusiastically pro-lockdown, and he is Black Lives Matter devotee. There are lines out there. There's a sort of an acceptable edginess, and then there are lines you don't cross. And if you cross those lines, you can forget about a career in public life. Black Lives Matter is one of those lines. Mm-hmm. Openly criticize Black Lives Matter, and you'll get yourself into trouble. Perhaps Piers is authentic, and perhaps he really does support Black Lives Matter. Perhaps he doesn't actually understand what they stand for. I doubt it, however. I have a feeling that he has gone so far and no further. If you want a career in mainstream television or print media or radio, you can go so far that acceptable opposition, if you like, and no further. And I think Black Lives Matter, for example, is a line that a lot of people are not willing to cross, even including Piers Morgan. But he's not. Some of what he says is quite good. But yeah, it's a sad indictment, really, isn't it? That someone like him is considered so edgy.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing I wanted to talk to you about is I was watching, you talk about sort of like the fearfulness of the mainstream media to dare touch or criticize sort of radical Islam. One documentary that confirmed that sort of attitude for me recently was, I'm not sure if you've seen it, the Sky documentary about Shamima Begum that aired recently. It was called The Return Life After ISIS, where it was essentially I don't mean to be very blunt about this, like sort of a PR piece first saying, actually, she's just an innocent little bubble and so on. Is she sort of like the, I'm not sure what you would call it, sort of like the figurehead of everything that's pretty much wrong with how the mainstream media tackles radical Islam and issues around it?
I haven't seen that, but I'm going to. It's on Sky, is it?
Yeah, Sky documentaries, yeah.
Okay, I'll have a look at that. Look, there is a debate and a discussion to be had around Shamima Begum. On my side is probably quite obvious to you. But there is a debate to be had around citizenship and what we do with citizens who go to fight for enemy terror groups and what have you. There is a debate to be had about this. The press will, of course, take her side, for want of a better expression. It will, PR piece is how you described it. I haven't seen it, so I can't comment on that. But it doesn't surprise me if it is a PR piece for her. But here's the thing that really, really infuriates a lot of people. They're willing to give Shamima Begum the benefit of the doubt, if you like. They're willing to forgive her. But you try being an activist with the English Defence League, for example, and then see whether they're willing to forgive you. Now, you have far less to be forgiven for if you were an activist with the English Defence League than if you went off to fight for ISIS. But the one is portrayed as the devil, absolutely unforgivable. You must be punished for the rest of your life for marching down the street with the English Defence League. But a madam over here who believes in this absolutely barbaric, medieval, monstrous ideology, well, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. Let's talk to her. It's an incredible thing that if you join an organization that hates this country, you can be forgiven. If you join an organization that loves this country, you will never be forgiven. Now, that's very, very telling. And it's very typical, actually, of the arrogant, bizarre mixture of narcissism and self-loathing that is this liberal elite that is willing to give the benefit of the doubt, to give a sympathetic ear to ISIS, but never to the EDL. Incredible, absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that one element of this, I'm not talking about the media in general, but like sort of like the more radical left-wing types who sort of like are very, soft on this sort of thing. Do you think they do it because they sort of sympathize with sort of like the radicalism of these, of groups like ISIS and so on? Because you read, for example, Chris Harman, who was a famous Socialist Workers' Party person, if I'm not mistaken, who wrote something called The Prophet and the Proletariat, where he essentially said that the sort of like the radicals and the progressive left could work with radical Islamists because they essentially had the same goals of revolution, even though they hated religion pretty much. Do you think that's one element of it, that like a lot of the radical left share the same goals, so they're willing to put up this weird alliance with people like Shamima Begum, for example?
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. They're not dissimilar in many regards. The radical Islam and the radical left are not dissimilar. They are both, it's only in the last couple of decades, really, that the radical left have become so internationalist, so globalist. And ironically, they prop up big global corporations and conglomerates and empower Silicon Valley billionaires to decide who should know what. It's an extraordinary thing, leftists for billionaires. It makes no sense at all. But they're not actually that dissimilar in today. They do both have this revolutionary mindset. They do both have collectivist ideas over the individual. They are both internationalist. They both loathe democracy, capitalism, and they were, the revolutionaries against the West, against the established order, if you like, in Western society. They both want to bring it down and then rule over the rubble. I mean, both of them are utopian ideals. The hard left wants to bring down Western society and replace it with a communist society. Many of them won't call it that, but that's essentially what it is. Whereas the Islamists want to bring down Western society and replace it with an Islamic state. They're both completely ridiculous and completely impossible. And the utopia does not exist. But they both are inspired and aiming towards the utopian society that they envisage in their own heads, which are not actually that dissimilar. However, the end result, of course, of Islamic State would be different in many regards to a communist state, religion being, of course, one of them. But I don't think they thought that far ahead. There is an alliance, an open alliance. It's not a behind-the-scenes alliance, it's an open alliance between Islamists and radical leftists. And I'm not sure they've thought ahead as to what happens if and when they do bring down Western society, which one of them will get to install their utopia. I don't think they've thought that through, and they have different utopias in mind. This is not unheard of. I mean, it happened in Iran as well. Prior to the Islamic Revolution in 79, you had an alliance between the communists and the Islamists. And naturally enough, the Islamists came to power. The communists brought the mullahs to power, and the mullahs then killed the communists. So I don't think they've thought through what the end result is and which utopia they're going to install when they reduce Western society to rubble.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think the reason that the soft left might, I'm not talking about the radicals, like sort of like the more mainstream sort of social democratic left, the reason that they don't dare criticize Islam is because on one hand they're a bit afraid of sort of like the more radical adherents coming to sort of like criticize them and hurt them or so on. And then you have sort of like the Labour Party and Labour Party candidates in some of these areas afraid of annoying some voters in those areas. So for example, you see like Kim, the one who stood in Batley in Spain, she was talking, for example, heavily about Palestine and Israel, which, if I'm not mistaken, is not exactly the #1 priority of many of the voters in Batley and Spain, where there's been stuff with, as you said earlier, grooming gangs and the whole Batley grammar school thing. Do you think it's just like they're scared of alienating on the one end some of their voters, perhaps, and on the other they're just scared to criticize it in general because they're scared of what might happen to them by more radical adherents?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier, isn't it? It's easier to just say nothing. I mean, there's a whole cacophony of problems waiting for you if you say these things. You'll be attacked by the press. You risk actual physical attack. But isn't it? It's so telling that the Muslim population of Batley and Spain is around 20%. Now that means 80% is not Muslim. So you would think that the politicians wouldn't put all of their focus and energy into either saying nothing to offend this 20% or actively courting that 20%, as Kim Ledbetter did. It's shocking but not surprising that she put out leaflets about Kashmir and Palestine in Batley and Spain. So we had George Galloway putting out letters with his Salam Alaikum and what have you, and Inshallah all over his literature. You have two people furiously courting the vote of 20% by discussing Palestine and Kashmir in a West Yorkshire constituency. It's, talk about proving me right. This is exactly what we're talking about, is this kowtowing to the Muslim population of this country. And as it gets bigger, watch the kowtowing get even greater. And they will ask for the Islamists who purport to lead them, will ask for full-on Sharia law, and they will get it. Now, the problem is that 53% of the people in Batley and Spain didn't bother to vote at all. I put a fair bit of money, if I had it, on those 53% being mostly white ethnic Brits. They need to get off their backside and start voting, because otherwise Muslims will determine who is in power in this country. That's where we're going.
Do you think that maybe a solution to all this sort of tensions and community tensions would be integrating some of these people better? Because that's, we've been encouraging like multiculturalism for the last like couple of decades, and that doesn't seem to have particularly worked. And if you look at, say, smaller, for example, Muslim populations in areas like, say, Cornwall and so on, you don't hear a lot of the sort of controversies in those sort of areas where it's smaller and they integrate a lot better, as opposed to ones where, no one bothers to integrate and so on. Do you think it's just a matter of integration is the answer, we should be encouraging a lot more?
We absolutely should be encouraging integration. And I think there are many, let's be fair about this, there are many Muslims in this country who do integrate and who want to integrate. We have a huge issue, though, and a part of it is that we have very different cultural values. And a lot of we're constantly, the white population is constantly accused of hate. There's a lot of hate going in the other direction as well. There's a lot of disapproval of our culture and our society. And we sort of join in with that. We are constantly self-flagellating, this almost open contempt for our own society. We have to start praising our own society first. We have to start showing other people that this is a society worth joining. We have, from the very opening of this mass immigration, we have told people, essentially, your culture is better than ours. You stick to your own culture. This culture is worthless anyway. Don't bother joining it. A starting point for us is starting to recognize and publicly acknowledging what is good about our culture. We need to start selling our culture to people and that it's worth joining. Integration is an issue, but it's not going to be that easy because we do have very, very different cultural values. And this should have, and it's too late for this now, but this should have been thought about before the borders opened in the way that they did. It should have been. We should have known and seen that these clashes would come. But the fact was, politicians then and now didn't really care about what they were creating, the mess they were going to create. Integration is an issue, yes. But we have to admit that for a lot of people, it's not going to work. And we have to decide what we do if and when it doesn't work. We need to get a bit tougher. One thing that has to happen is that we must stop this inflow right now. How on earth can we expect to integrate the people who are already here if more and more and more and more and more keep arriving? The ghettoized, separate communities keep getting more and more separate. We have things like Black Lives Matter stirring up racial hatred, stirring up anti-white hatred. And the anti-white hatred is a huge issue. We've got to stop that immediately. How do we expect any of this to get better while the borders remain open and more people just keep coming? It's a disaster. And something is going, there's going to be, in my mind, a moment when there's a backlash coming. And I don't want a nasty backlash. But if we don't stop this, if we don't stop, the anti-white hatred is a huge issue. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And we can forget about integration. Integration would be great. But we're going in the opposite direction. We're creating more and more division. And I'm sorry, I know a lot of people will find this a shockingly controversial statement, but we have got to stop the immigration now if we hope to get a grip with this at all. It's just, with immigration, it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse.
I don't think that's necessarily too controversial. I swear that's what the Trump administration did last year in America, and not many people complained then, from what I gathered. And one thing also on the topic of immigration as well is that, do you think that the plans the current Conservative government have put in place, like the points-based system, is at least one step in the right direction, or do you think there's a lot of leaks in the bowl, so to speak, like for stuff like example, like Priti Patel on an LBC interview openly admitting that business helped her with conducting some of the plans and so on, which is always not particularly good sign when they want cheap labor and so on. Do you think there's at least a step in the right direction, the fact that immigration is...
No, I really don't. I think that actually, if you look at a lot of the Tory policies and the Tory plans, it will actually increase immigration. She put out, Priti Patel put out, the Home Office put out a video recently about the new way that they're going to process asylum. And they're going to go out to countries and find asylum. It's absolutely bizarre to me that we're going to go out to countries and bring people here, so they don't even have to make this journey anymore. If you look in great detail at the point system, it will actually increase immigration to this country. And I think that the Tories are pulling off a very deceitful, very clever trick here in trying to put on a theatre performance of immigration control, but actually the reality is quite the opposite. And if Priti Patel, if the Tory government, they've been in government, let's not forget, for 11 years, if they really wanted to do something to reduce immigration, they would have done it by now. And they haven't done it by now. Immigration has gone up and up and up under the Tories. And we had another little card trick was the European Union, saying that when we get out of the European Union, we can take back control of immigration. Well, you had control of non-European immigration all this time. And non-European immigration is the most worrying type of immigration because the cultures are so different. European immigration, Europeans' culture is relatively very similar. And it's on a similar level of standards of living, etc. So we're talking, the most worrying part of immigration actually is from developing third world countries with vastly different cultural values, religious values, and what have you. This is the most alarming type of immigration. And it's also higher than European immigration and has been higher than European immigration for quite some time. So we are being deceived by the Tories here. They could control this immigration. They've been in government for 11 years. They went along with the trick, the lie, that once we get out of the EU, we can control immigration. They had control of non-European immigration. They didn't reduce it then, they won't reduce it now. This is politics by the Tories.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I wanted to talk to you about as well is that earlier you were talking about Iran and stuff like that. Last year, I swear, I saw you put out a video talking about, like, if we needed to, we should perhaps go to I could be wrong in what I'm saying here. We should perhaps go to have armed conflict with Iran. I think is what you said, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't say that at all. What would happen is when Trump took out, was it who? What was his name?
Soleimani, I think it's
That's him. When Trump killed him, he was condemned by across the board for it. I simply said, I'm not going to shed any tears about this at all. I think, Trump is so attacked, relentlessly attacked for every move he made by mainstream politicians, particularly in this country. I thought, well, look, if he wants to take out these people, good for him. The world is a better place without them. I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. I'll shed no tears for them whatsoever. But Trump actually was the least aggressive US president in these regards for a long, long time. And I supported that. But I made a video simply saying, look, will you all just wind your necks in and stop condemning him for this? This guy is a mass terrorist, and getting rid of him is I'm not going to shed any tears over it at all. And that, can we just stop attacking Trump every 5 minutes? I said nothing at all. I understand that those who don't like me very much misrepresented that and continue to, that I was calling for armed conflict with Iran. I've done nothing of the kind. I'm very clear that we should be going into armed conflict with no one. We should be protecting the borders of this country.
Apologies, that's what.
No, that's okay. I understand that that's gone around, but thank you for letting me clarify it, actually.
Sure, that's all right. And one other thing I wanted to ask you, this will be one of the last few questions because of just time constraints and so on. What do you think, speaking of armed conflict stuff, of the fact that Joe Biden and Boris Johnson, all these Western leaders are now pulling out of Afghanistan after this deal was done last year with the Taliban and so on? We're pulling out of Afghanistan. What do you think the consequences, because we talk about radical Islam and so on, there's worries about the Taliban taking over Afghanistan again. How do you think that the war essentially against like radical Islam and radical Islam in that area in general, how do you think that withdrawing from this area, which is a hotbed for this stuff, will affect it? So do you think it was the right call to get out of this place?
It's a very, very difficult one. In some ways I do, because I think in some ways the presence there makes things worse. It's a recruiting sergeant for Islamists. It is really, really difficult. But on the other hand, you pull out and the Taliban come back, and then you have a whole new host of problems. Look, these are what I would like to see happen, actually. What I always find ironic in a tragic way is that we can send British troops to Afghanistan to fight the Taliban while promoting Taliban beliefs here in Britain. I would like us to stay out of armed conflicts abroad. I do want to bring British troops home. But what we have to do is start fighting it here. Taliban's ideology is not unique to the Taliban. This jihadism, this desire for a Sharia society is not unique to the Taliban. We have many people here in Britain who share those beliefs. But we have many people here in Britain who will have been, I've no doubt, either active with the Taliban or groups with similar ideals to the Taliban. We give them refuge. We let them set up organizations here. We let them set up funding channels Here, we allow, to a lesser extent, but still on the same wavelength, we allow for the proliferation, the imposition of halal products on our society. We allow and do nothing about appalling crimes, which are Islamic cultural crimes, child marriage or FGM, these horrors. We allow it. So we send British troops abroad to fight the Taliban while allowing Taliban-like beliefs to cement themselves into this society. I would rather we stayed away from there, and I know that's not easy, and fought this ideology here at home. But you're in a lose-lose situation in many respects with regard to pulling out or staying in Afghanistan. You come out, the Taliban rises again. You stay in, you have a recruiting sergeant, almost an anti-Western recruiting sergeant. It is extremely difficult. I'm not suggesting that the politicians who have to deal with these things don't have a very difficult job on their hands. But what I think we ought to be doing for a change is concentrating on making this country safer. And part of that, perhaps, a debate to be had there is if we stay out of Afghanistan, it helps to keep this country safer. But there is a tragic irony in fighting the Taliban there while allowing Taliban-like ideals to proliferate here. Very difficult.
And
I don't envy them.
And the penultimate question I want to ask you is, if hypothetically, if full Britain were to come into power and Parliament come power and government in the next 10 years or so, what would it do to, as you said earlier, reduce sort of like Taliban influence at home, or like this ideology in Britain, for example? What would the full Britain do? The main key points it would do to get rid of sort of radical Islam in this country, or try to reduce it as much as it can?
The first thing you have to do is stop the immigration. Nothing can happen while people keep coming. I mean, this is obvious to me. To me, this is 2 and 2 equals 4. Although I'm not sure in this Orwellian world we live in whether 2 and 2 equals 4 still.
It equals 5 now.
For me, is it 5 now? Is
yeah,
it? Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
First thing that has to happen is the immigration. We have thousands of known jihadis being watched permanently by security services in this country. And there are thousands more that we can't watch because we don't have the resources. Why are they in this country? I would put money that many of, if not most of them, are not British citizens. They need to be deported. I'd also, now I'm not suggesting we dismantle the justice system, but if you have, for example, with grooming gangs, if you have people who are not British citizens, but who are reasonably expected or reasonably suspected of involvement in grooming gangs, they should be deported. People who practice abhorrent crimes against children like FGM or child marriage, and they're not British citizens, they must be deported. We do have freedom of speech in this country, but we do not owe that to people from other parts of the world. We owe it to British citizens. Now, why are we allowing, or why have we been for years, allowing preachers, Islamist preachers, to come to this country and stir up hatred against this country? They shouldn't be allowed to come in. I can tell you, without a shadow of hesitation or doubt, if you took those steps, you would transform this society, and you would transform how jihadis all over the world see this country. They would be not, it would completely, you would completely change. At the moment, we're seen as weak by these people, and with good reason. If we did just those things, which are all perfectly reasonable things, if you did just those things, you would be seen as strong. And, you know, jihadis respond to weakness by pushing and pushing and pushing. They respond to strength by pulling back. You would completely change. That is what we would do in the first year of a full Britain government. We would do that. And then you reassess and see where you are. And I guarantee you, you are in a much stronger position with a little bit of Trumpism in this country. We also then need to coincide in with that. We need to bring back some pride in this country. We need to start flying the flag. We need to stop the anti-white hatred. We need to change the education curriculum to teach children good things about this country. We need to restore a bit of pride. People won't fight for a country if they hate that country. People won't fight for themselves if they hate themselves. We need to give this country its confidence back. We need to get it to start liking itself again. You do those two things simultaneously, and you will be in a radically different position to what you're in now.
Mm-hmm. And the last question I want to ask you, this is the title of the show, and I ask all my guests this, is what would your ideal world be?
Freedom. I want individual freedom for people. I want people should be self-confident, not full of self-hatred. Self-hatred is so destructive, and we should teach people self-confidence. We should teach them peace. We should teach them. When I say peace, I mean I think there's a mental health crisis. I think we should look at that. I want people who are strong, self-confident, who like themselves, who are respectful of each other, who have individual freedom, who are free to pursue lives that make them happy within the confines only of allowing other people to do the same. I want a democratic society. I want the powerful to answer to the electorate, for example. We are the other way around now. People in this country are now dictated to, dominated by, and in many countries, in fact, across the West, the governments no longer fear the people. It's the people who fear the governments. That has to be the other way around. I want the powerful to be held to account. For that, I want open, honest debate. I want a media that gives a platform to any political candidate and allows them to speak. I want real democracy. I want it, for example, if there's an election held, that every candidate is allowed to speak openly and freely, and then the electorate may cast their vote based upon that, not through the filter of a dishonest and biased media. So I want free, self-confident, upstanding, decent, respectful society. We can achieve that if people are, if people are self-confident, if they have a freedom. I want a free market. I mean, free markets create wealth. It works. It also, we must allow people to be creative. We must allow cultures to develop freely. A free, confident society in which the powerful answer to the people.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would like.
And thank you for coming on, by the way. And if people wanted to find your work or find out more about you and your party and all that sort of stuff, where can they find it? What social media links do you have? All that sort of stuff.
Well, our website is the only thing we cannot be shadow banned on. Our social media, we're to within an inch of our lives on Facebook, for example. I was kicked off Twitter for criticising South Yorkshire Police. So forbritain.uk is where you'll find who we actually are. Mm-hmm. That's the best place.
Fair enough. And thank you for coming on, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's
Take care then.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and share this video, as well as subscribe to the Ed Interviews YouTube channel, and also the Ed Interviews BitChute channel, and also look at my stuff on Mixcloud as well. I'll have more of this content coming in, and also subscribe to my Patreon subscribe star as well for more guest requests, as well as free copies of my old books. Until then, see you next time, guys.